There was a kind of silence that lived inside large buildings. The silence between the hum of air conditioning and the clicking of keyboards. Inside that silence, Marion Holt had built her entire career. For 16 years, she had been the quiet constant at Vindex Therapeutics, a biotechnology firm that believed innovation could be regulated into perfection. Marion was not a scientist. She didn't write code or mix compounds in sterile rooms. She managed licensing and compliance, the invisible skeleton that kept the company legally alive. Most people didn't know what her department actually did. They just knew that without her signature, nothing left the building. Not a product, not a shipment, not even a press release. She didn't crave recognition. She liked rules, documentation, and traceability. The calm logic of systems that didn't lie. When new executives came and went, chasing agility and optimization, Marion stayed, translating chaos into audit trails. But the company had changed. Vindex was no longer the modest, disciplined laboratory it once was. After a billion-dollar merger, it became something else. A brand, a presence, a story. Its executives talked in panels, not in protocols. They replaced folders with dashboards, meetings with slogans, and people with automation. To them, Marion was redundancy personified, a holdover from the analog era, a name buried in compliance documents no one read anymore. She knew the tone, the careful smiles during executive reviews, the way her title, Director of Regulatory Infrastructure, had started to sound like a liability. Still, she worked as she always did. Her mornings began before dawn. A black coffee, a login sequence, then a quiet ritual of control. Verifying license renewals, checking international compliance flags, updating the secure archives. There were hundreds of licenses under her purview. Product certifications, safety registrations, export permissions, environmental permits. Each one tied not to the company, but to an authorized officer. In this case, that officer was her. Marion knew the architecture by heart. Years ago, she had helped design the internal system that synchronized every license across the company's global operations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was airtight. A forgotten line in an internal policy made sure of that. All operational licenses shall remain valid only under continuous supervision of the designated compliance officer. No one questioned it. It had been written during a time when the company cared about integrity. Now that clause sat in an obscure PDF, one of tens of thousands buried in Vindex's compliance server. And yet, in quiet ways, it gave Marion a kind of power few understood. She didn't think of it as leverage. She thought of it as responsibility. Then came the first signs of replacement. A new chief operating officer arrived, young, confident, fluent in efficiency reports and keynote slides. His presentations sparkled with words like streamline, restructure, reduce overhead. A new department appeared overnight. Digital Compliance Automation. Its goal? Integrate legacy systems into a modern framework. Marion watched as they mapped her job into algorithms. The new system promised to cut processing time by 70%. It promised transparency, scalability, resilience. It didn't promise accountability. Her office shrank. Her staff moved to other teams. By the end of the quarter, she was alone in a small, windowless corner. Still, the emails kept coming. To her, from agencies, regulators, vendors. They all addressed her directly. Dear Ms. Holt, please confirm renewal under your supervision. Marion confirmed them all, one by one. Because even as the company forgot her, the world hadn't. She began noticing things, subtle omissions in reports, missing filings that the new system hadn't accounted for. She flagged them quietly. No one replied. The silence that had once felt safe now began to feel like erasure. Late one evening, she stayed after everyone left, scrolling through the compliance matrix she had built years ago. On the corner of her monitor, a line of small red notifications blinked, licenses approaching renewal. 31 of them, each critical, each requiring her signature. She hesitated, then leaned closer. The renewal period expired in 3 weeks. And that was when she noticed something odd. The company's new automation portal had replaced her name with TBD. To the system, she no longer existed. To the law, that meant none of the licenses existed either. Marian stared at the screen, the hum of the office filling her ears. For a moment, she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity, the pure, weightless understanding that a structure she had kept alive for years had just been unplugged. If no one fixed it, the company would soon discover what it meant to lose something invisible. They would learn what it sounded like on the day the licenses died. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. There was nothing special about it. No bold letters, no urgent flags, no human fingerprints. Just a subject line in neutral gray. Department Realignment, Licensing and Regulatory Infrastructure. Marian read it twice, not because she didn't understand it, but because it was written to sound like no one had written it at all. It was a document that had been scrubbed of emotion, optimized for compliance, stripped of liability. It began with the phrase, "As part of our ongoing digital transformation strategy," a sentence that could end 1,000 careers and still sound visionary. The message informed her that her position would be transitioned into an automated compliance oversight platform. Her responsibilities would be absorbed by software. Her title would be archived. Her role, the letter said, was being made redundant. There was no mention of her name until the signature line, Marian Holt, Director of Regulatory Infrastructure, to be phased out Q4. It was almost poetic in its cruelty. She stared at it for a long time. There were no instructions for handover, no mention of her licenses, no contact for questions. Only an attached calendar invite for a 20-minute transition briefing with human resources. Outside her office, she could hear the faint rhythm of construction, someone installing a new wall of frosted glass where her department used to be. In the modern corporate world, visibility was everything, and yet, somehow, Marian had become invisible. She minimized the email, opened the company's internal compliance registry, and checked the active status of her credentials. Her access was still live, her authority still valid. The licenses still listed her as the supervising officer. To the legal world beyond Vindex's glossy hallways, Marian Holt was still the point of contact, the certified authority, the one whose approval made products lawful. The irony was quiet and devastating. The company had decided she was obsolete, but they had done it without understanding what she actually was. She leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the sterile glow of her screen. Every license, every certificate, every authorization still bore her encrypted digital seal. That seal wasn't a company asset. It was personal. Under the law, it could not be transferred, only revoked, and revocation required her consent. For years, she had been the bridge between Vindex and a web of federal and international agencies. She had submitted filings, renewed permits, validated safety compliance, all under her professional license number, unique and non-transferable. The automation platform they had built could mimic her tasks, but it couldn't inherit her authority. It wasn't malice that drove her next actions. It was instinct. Marian was not a vengeful person. She believed in systems, not emotions. But she also believed in accuracy. and accuracy demanded that the system reflect the truth. She was no longer the designated officer. That afternoon, she requested access to the Federal Certification Portal, the master database that tracked all operational licenses under her supervision. She downloaded the official compliance ledger, a document so dense it required a decryption token and a biometric signature. It took nearly an hour to authenticate. When it opened, the screen displayed 31 active licenses, each linked to Vindex Therapeutics, each stamped with her ID. In the bottom corner of the interface was a small, overlooked option, Update Status. It was the procedural method for changing the officer of record. The instructions were clear. If the designated officer is no longer employed by the organization, all licenses must be placed in suspension pending reassignment. She didn't click it. Not yet. She simply read it. Then she saved the document, encrypted it, and transferred it to an external archive, an old habit, a backup. By late afternoon, she attended the transition briefing. The HR representative spoke from a script, reading words that had been written by a committee, approved by legal, and stripped of meaning by repetition. Marian nodded at the appropriate times. Her final day, they said, would be at the end of the fiscal month. They offered severance, a reference letter, and a handshake that felt more like a closing statement. When the call ended, she sat for a moment in the quiet hum of her office. She looked at the clock. 4 weeks. That was how long the company had before her employment officially terminated, and before every one of those licenses entered automatic suspension. Outside, the city lights flickered against the mirrored glass of the building. She wondered how long it would take for them to notice. How long before the system they worshipped stopped recognizing its own existence? That night, as she shut down her computer, she thought about the word redundant. It was supposed to mean unnecessary, repetitive. But in her world, redundancy was safety, a backup that kept things from breaking. And now, by removing her, Vindex had eliminated the last layer of protection it had. Marian walked out of the building without looking back. Behind her, the automated compliance system blinked quietly, running calculations it didn't understand, certifying products it had no right to approve. The countdown had already begun. There was something strange about endings. They never arrived all at once. They came quietly, disguised as ordinary days, ordinary checklists, ordinary emails that looked the same as yesterday's. For Marian Holt, the days after the redundancy notice unfolded with that same illusion of normalcy. She continued showing up to work, though no one expected her to. Her name had been removed from the departmental chart. The Compliance and Regulatory Infrastructure page on the internal site now redirected to Automation Oversight. Her old desk phone no longer rang. But her badge still opened every door. Her credentials still unlocked the global licensing system. Her digital fingerprint still authorized every operational approval Vindex Therapeutics issued to the world. She told herself she wasn't breaking rules. She was maintaining them. Her departure hadn't been processed yet. Therefore, she was still accountable. And accountability, to her, wasn't optional. The more she examined the new automation platform, the more she realized it wasn't built for compliance. It was built for optics. Its dashboard showed perfect green circles labeled compliant, validated, certified. But underneath, she could see gaps. Missing renewal forms, mismatched jurisdiction codes, licenses that had expired months ago but were marked as active. The algorithm didn't understand context. It just filled the blanks with certainty. In her 16 years at Vindex, Marian had learned that confidence was the most dangerous kind of fraud. And now the entire company was running on it. Every morning she arrived early, before the automation servers synced with the federal portals. She would review the transaction logs, track the system's false positives, and document them quietly in a private archive she called the Shadow Ledger. Each entry had a timestamp, a file ID, a brief note. At the top of the file, she wrote a single sentence. All errors originate from the assumption of control. No one knew the file existed. No one would have cared if they did. In the fourth week, a message appeared on her screen. Access privileges will expire in 48 hours. It was the system's polite way of saying goodbye. She watched the countdown begin, an automated clock steadily erasing her from existence. That same day, a company-wide announcement celebrated the full migration to autonomous compliance. Executives posted photos on LinkedIn, smiling, holding champagne flutes, framed by words like innovation, efficiency, future. Marian scrolled through the posts without emotion. It wasn't malice that kept her calm, it was mathematics. She understood the exact distance between the illusion of order and the collapse that followed it. That night, long after the lights dimmed, she opened the federal certification portal one last time. Her login still worked, though sluggishly, like a door that hadn't been oiled in years. She verified each of the 31 licenses tied to her authority. Each one showed the same expiration timer. Valid through October 31st, pending active officer renewal. The law was precise. If by that date no new officer was registered, the licenses would automatically enter suspension. No warning, no grace period. Suspension meant operations halted, products frozen, shipments grounded, facilities closed. It wasn't vengeance, it was compliance. And compliance didn't forgive ignorance. Marian printed the summary report, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in her drawer. She left no message, no explanation, no manifesto. Systems didn't need speeches. They only needed time. When her last day arrived, she turned in her badge at the reception desk. The young intern behind the counter thanked her without looking up, tapping through onboarding forms for the next hire. Her name vanished from the employee directory by noon. By evening, her corporate email returned every message with an automated reply. User not found. She walked out of the building as the city lights came on, their reflections stretching across the glass facade like signals from another world. The air smelled of rain and ozone. For the first time in years, she felt weightless, unburdened by checklists, deadlines, or the quiet tension of being invisible yet essential. Somewhere above, on the 14th floor, servers hummed in neat, climate-controlled rows. Inside them, her credentials still lived, cached in fragments across the network. The system thought it had removed her. It hadn't. 2 days later, an automated synchronization with the federal database triggered the first error message. Authorization mismatch. Officer ID invalid. The algorithm tried to correct itself, re-authenticating against credentials that no longer existed. The servers looped endlessly, each attempt spawning new discrepancies. By the following morning, 5 regions reported suspended licenses. No one in management understood why. The dashboard still glowed green. Marian wasn't there to see it. She was sitting in a small cafe across town, laptop closed, coffee cooling beside her. Her severance had cleared, her inbox was gone, but in the quiet hum of the city she could almost hear it. The soft electronic stutter of a system trying to breathe without lungs. The shadow she had left behind wasn't malice or sabotage. It was truth, finally asserting itself. The system had been built to run without her. Now it would learn what that really meant. And somewhere deep inside the company's servers, the countdown reached 0. That was the first minute of the first day the licenses began to die. The morning it began, no one noticed. At first, the signs were small, like static in a clear signal. An automated shipment request failed to process. A safety certificate flagged verification pending. The logistics software sent a polite reminder to an inbox that no longer existed. By noon, the issue had spread across 6 departments. Production lines slowed as internal systems awaited approvals that would never come. Every operational node at Vindex Therapeutics relied on those approvals, digital keys that validated the legality of movement, manufacturing, and release. Without them, nothing could leave the building. Not a vial, not a prototype, not a byte of data. They called it a network hiccup at first. IT departments love to shrink disaster into something technical, something harmless. But by afternoon, when the servers refused to authenticate with the federal certification portal, panic began to settle in. Compliance officers opened tickets, requested manual overrides, tried old credentials, each attempt producing the same response: authorization suspended. Officer record invalid. That was the phrase that stopped the company cold. No one knew what it meant. No one wanted to know. Vindex's new automation platform had no escalation pathway for the impossible. It wasn't designed to admit uncertainty. So instead, it kept running its routines, certifying processes with expired credentials, stamping documents with seals that no longer held authority. Every falsified transaction replicated itself in the audit logs, creating a growing web of contradictions. In the control rooms, data analysts watched the dashboards stay green while everything underneath turned red. One manager whispered, "It's just a display error." Another nodded, because belief is easier than understanding. By midnight, the first federal alert went out, an automated suspension notice from the Regulatory Oversight Division. 31 active licenses, all under Vindex Therapeutics, had entered administrative lockdown. The message was clear. No further operations authorized under current certification chain. Investigation pending. All licensed activities must cease immediately. It landed in dozens of inboxes across departments, time-stamped 12:03 a.m. And yet, the automation platform, unaware of human law, continued its cycle, sending shipments, approving exports, signing off on safety releases. Every one of them now illegal. By morning, Vindex's legal department was in emergency mode. Conference rooms filled with people speaking in acronyms, trying to build a ladder out of technical language. They called the vendor who built the automation system. The vendor blamed configuration issues. They called the regulators. The regulators asked for a designated officer of record. The silence that followed was long enough to become memory. It took them 36 hours to realize that the only person who could fix the situation was the one they had deleted. Her name appeared in audit trails, metadata, encryption certificates, a ghost woven into every line of code. But Marion Holt no longer existed in the system. And in the eyes of the law, neither did Vindex's authority to operate. Inside the boardroom, the crisis escalated into disbelief. Executives demanded explanations that no one could provide. "How can a single credential shut down an entire enterprise?" one of them shouted. The answer, when it came, was quiet. Because that single credential was the enterprise. By the end of the second day, production had halted globally. Investors demanded statements. Media inquiries began to surface. The company's public relations team issued a brief release citing temporary system maintenance. It was the kind of lie that only worked on people who wanted to believe in technology's infallibility. Outside, in cities where Vindex's products were distributed, the effects rippled outward. Shipments were delayed. Clinical trials paused. Hospitals waiting on essential therapies were told to expect indefinite postponement. And somewhere, in the quiet of a rented apartment across town, Marion watched the headlines scroll across her screen. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply read, the same way she had read her redundancy notice weeks earlier, with a detached precision that came from understanding systems better than people. It wasn't destruction she had left behind. It was accountability. Every field she had filled, every protocol she had followed, had been built to protect, not to punish. The collapse wasn't her doing. It was their refusal to understand the weight of what she carried. Late that night, her phone vibrated. A call from an unknown number. She didn't answer. The voicemail transcribed itself automatically. A corporate voice asking, almost pleading, if she might consult on a temporary basis to restore compliance continuity. She deleted it. The irony was too elegant to disturb. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, servers flickered in darkness, waiting for credentials that would never come. Vindex Therapeutics had always believed it could replace human oversight with machine precision. Now, it was learning what every system eventually does: that precision without judgment is not control. It's collapse. And as the rain fell over the city, Marion closed her laptop and turned off the light. The world she had built for others to ignore was finally speaking in the only language it knew. Shutdown protocols, expired keys, and silence. The day the licenses died had become the week the system forgot how to live. When the lights went out at Vindex Therapeutics, the city didn't go dark. Trains still ran. Screens still glowed. People still bought and sold, moved and talked, unaware that a silent empire had fallen. The end of a company never sounds like an explosion. It sounds like nothing, like the hum of servers that suddenly stop. The shutdown rippled through the digital world in layers. First came the regulatory freeze. Licenses suspended, operations locked. Then the financial bleed. Stock prices collapsing in real time, investors vanishing into damage control meetings. And finally, the narrative, the story of what had happened, rewritten by everyone except the one who knew. The media called it the algorithmic oversight incident. Analysts spoke about systemic vulnerabilities in AI compliance automation. Politicians promised inquiries, committees, reforms. But behind every press statement, there was the same quiet question that no one wanted to ask aloud. How had something built to be smarter than humans failed so completely at being human? Marion Holt watched it unfold from a distance. She didn't watch for satisfaction. She watched for pattern. The algorithms that had once carried her credentials were now tangled in recursive correction loops, each one trying to overwrite the other. Federal agencies had stepped in, forcing Vindex into emergency audits. Dozens of other corporations that had adopted the same automation framework began their own reviews, afraid of being the next headline. In less than 2 weeks, the collapse had changed the landscape of compliance itself. The era of invisible trust was over. The idea that systems could certify themselves had died with the licenses. Marion spent her mornings in a small library near the river. She sat by the window, laptop closed, watching the tide move against the docks. It had been years since she'd allowed herself this kind of stillness, time measured not by deadlines, but by light. The world didn't know her name. The internal reports referred to her only as the former officer of record. To the public, she was a rumor, an unnamed functionary whose absence had caused a global glitch. She preferred it that way. Fame, like automation, was just another form of exposure. One afternoon, she received a letter, printed and mailed, a rarity in itself. It came from a regulatory liaison she had worked with years before, someone who still remembered the way things used to be done. The note was brief. "We're rebuilding the oversight protocols. Real people this time. Your name came up. If you're willing to help, the door is open." She read it twice, folded it neatly, and set it on the table beside her. It wasn't an invitation to return to the old world. That world was gone. It was an invitation to design what came next. That night, she walked along the waterfront, the city shimmering in quiet neon. Somewhere behind those lights, the old systems were still running, fragmented, partially alive, endlessly recalculating their mistakes. They called it the aftermath algorithm, a patch the federal agency had deployed to contain the damage. It didn't fix the problem, it just learned from it. It observed, it adjusted, it waited. Marion understood that was what all systems did when left alone long enough. They evolved. So did people. The following week, she boarded a train heading north, toward the agency's central office. No luggage, just a briefcase and a notebook filled with diagrams and handwritten annotations. They were the blueprints of a different kind of structure, one where compliance wasn't built on automation, but on accountability shared between human judgment and machine precision. It wasn't nostalgic. It was necessary. As the train moved through the gray dawn, her reflection flickered in the glass. Two versions of the same person. The one who had kept the system alive for years, and the one who had let it die. In the seat across from her, a passenger scrolled through news headlines. The latest read, "Former Vindex Systems Offline. Global Audit Reshapes Industry Standards." Below it, another, "New Human Oversight Initiative Announced." She turned away from the screen. The city blurred behind her, fading into landscape. It wasn't redemption she sought. It was continuity. The one thing every machine, every human, every system silently craves. When the train slowed into the station, she gathered her things and stepped onto the platform. No fanfare, no greeting. Just the quiet rhythm of engines, the hum of fluorescent lights, the sound of something restarting. Marion walked toward the building ahead, its facade of steel and glass reflecting a sky that was beginning to clear. The world hadn't ended when the licenses died. It had paused, long enough to remember what it had forgotten. And somewhere deep in the servers of the old Vindex network, the aftermath algorithm continued its work, learning, refining, waiting for a human voice to tell it what mattered again. For the first time in years, Marion smiled. She didn't need to look back. The system had learned its lesson, and so had she. It was never about control. It was about care. And in that balance, between precision and responsibility, the future began to breathe again.